From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode on what I wish I had known earlier in my career. It's interesting when I look back over the course of my career and starting out waiting tables and working in a pizza restaurant and making $2.13 an hour plus some tips, but $2.13 an hour to bust dirty tables, deliver drinks, take orders, and pick up half-eaten pizza crust off the floor. And looking back as I started that was the first, real job that I ever had. And one of the things that I wish I had known, even when I started there, was that my influence could be intentionally built and intentionally increased. And I think that's one of the things that I didn't consciously realize for many years. And it probably held me back over the course of my career because I didn't understand that concept. I thought that influence was something you either had or you didn't have. And I got a lot of the principles about increasing my influence right, even from the very beginning. But I didn't understand that because you can intentionally increase your influence, then I didn't understand how to intentionally increase my influence. And so while I naturally got a lot of things right, I got a lot of things wrong. Even in that very first job of just waiting tables and learning how to connect with people. And, it's not just taking their drink order and keeping their tea refilled that's determining your tips, right? It's building that connection and that relationship over the course of that interaction. And that can certainly increase your influence, which can certainly increase the amount of tip that you get. Have you ever eaten at a restaurant and just had an incredibly great experience? And for whatever reason, you really connected to your server. And so maybe you left him a little more than the typical 15 to 20%. Maybe you left him a little bit extra. Maybe you left him an extra $10 bill in cash. Maybe you just went above and beyond because you just felt they did such a great job at connecting with you and giving you an over the top experience. We've probably all had that. And then you've probably also had a negative experience in a restaurant, and hopefully you still did leave that server a tip, but maybe it wasn't that extra more than 15 or 20%. Maybe you felt like, they didn't do a good job, or they didn't really care about me, or, they had a bad attitude. And so I'm not going to leave them as big of a tip. And so, it's just one of those things. I look back now and I can see that how I went about what I did, even in that very first job. But I mean, this applies throughout my career and even today. How I do what I do is determining my influence. How you do what you do is determining your influence. But I didn't understand that early in my career. Now, I did get a lot of the things right. And looking back, what I knew right away is that, well, I knew within a first couple of weeks. By the time I got my first paycheck, let me tell you, I still have that paycheck somewhere. Last time we were moving and packing up boxes, I came across that. I still have that pay stub. For some of you, you don't even realize that you actually used to physically get a check and you'd have to take that check to the bank. Now it's all electronic pretty much, but I still have that pay stub, that very first pay stub. And let me tell you, even if you work 40 hours a week, if you're making $2.13 an hour, that's not going to be a very big paycheck at the end of the 2 weeks. But I remember getting that first paycheck and realizing, you know what? If I want to make more money in life, I'm going to have to do something different, right? The job of my dreams isn't going to come find me working here at Pizza Hut. And so I had a good work ethic. I worked hard. I got that right naturally. And that was just because I was a value driven person. It was just inherent in me. I want to do a good job. I took pride in working hard and doing a good job. And I got that right. And then I realized, well, if I want to increase my job options, I need some education. I need to go, start college and working on a degree and those kind of things. And it's absolutely true that increasing our competency can increase our influence. All three of the college degrees I have opened some doors for me in some way. So there's no doubt increasing our competency can increase our influence. But let me tell you what's much, much greater than that is growing and developing our character. And there again, we come back to the foundational truth of who we are and how we do what we do determines much, if not all, of our, well, not all, but much, the vast majority of our influence with other people. And I didn't know that. It was many years into my formal career before I realized that not only could influence be built, but I was learning how to go about building it. And so that's really one of the reasons I wrote this new book, The Ladder of Influence. It's just released. As I record this podcast, it's just come out and is now available on Amazon. And, I wrote this book and really brainstormed on the outline of it just a couple months ago. Mac and I were at the beach, and the concept just has just really been burning a hole in my pocket, so to speak, literarily. And I sat down to write the chapters, and I thought, I want to write the book that I wish I had known back then. If I'd had this book to read back then about how to really go about increasing my influence personally and professionally. There again, I got a lot of things naturally right, but I got a lot of things wrong. And certainly I could have increased my influence much more effectively earlier. And I have no doubt that would have changed a lot of the relationships, that would have changed a lot of the course, perhaps, of my career. It certainly could have changed some of the opportunities that I had or didn't have. And I look back, and back then it was kind of the thing. It was like, well, you work and you work hard at the job you're in, and for me, it was going to school at night and trying to get that competency and that degree that would open some doors. And over the years, in those early years, I remember having different opportunities, different job interviews, and I can think back to almost every single one of the job interviews that I didn't get the job for. And I can think about how I would be different in that job interview now. And I can't regret that, right? It's not about regret, but it's just looking back, and that's a sign of growth, is looking back at those job interviews where I didn't get the job and realizing I wasn't ready for that opportunity. I didn't get the job because I wasn't necessarily equipped for that. And that's okay. But realizing that how much I have grown since then in those early years, and realizing what I would say differently, how I would connect differently, how I would be differently, how I would do different things because I'm different, right? And there again, that's just a sign of growth. I hope that we can all look back from our first job to now and say, oh, I have grown since then. That's a great thing. But it really is learning that principle and then taking it and applying it now to how can I learn those lessons and how can I apply them today and intentionally increase my influence so that tomorrow when I get that job interview that I might want, that new job or that next career step, I am ready. I'm prepared. I'm ready to move forward. And I didn't understand that intuitively. I knew I needed to work hard so that I could get a good reference from previous employers. I knew, to do a good job and have integrity and show up to work on time and those things. But and I didn't really understand growing and developing my character would help me grow as a person, and that would help me increase my influence. And that changes the dynamic of our influence. And I didn't understand that. I wish I had known that earlier in my career. So, anyway, all that to say, that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this book, is because when I sit down to think about how do we intentionally increase our influence, And we all want to, right? All of us want more influence in life. There's absolutely no doubt. But a lot of times, either we don't understand how, or we aren't interested in doing so because we know it's going to require certainly some work and some effort on our part, and maybe even some sacrifice to do so. But like any journey that we take, any goal that we set and we work to achieve, we have to be willing to put the work in to become the person who can achieve that goal or be that person. Right. And then I relate it back to running a marathon because it's just such a good analogy. I just a couple weeks ago completed a race, and it was a down season for me, which means I didn't do a lot of speed work or tempo runs, and not in a lot of hardcore training. This focus for my season in running this year was really focusing on just strength and mobility and staying healthy. I'd had a several well, more than a year of really hard training, and so my focus for this season was a down season, just get back to just running and enjoying it, and not training too hard. And what's interesting is that I just off the cuff, kind of back in about the middle of January, I picked out a spring race and said, even though I haven't really been training hard, I just want to do a race. I still have been running some miles and running a good bit of miles, but, just for fun, like, let's just go out and do a spring race. And I actually did really, really well. Even a little bit better than I would have expected based on my fall race. And what I took away from that is it's not necessarily the goal itself. It's not necessarily the outcome itself. It's becoming the person who can achieve that goal, right? And that's where the analogy to influence comes in. Is it's not increasing our influence in the moment. It's becoming the person who has the influence, so that when the moment occurs, you have already done the work. You've already developed yourself. You've already developed your character, your level of self awareness, your personal growth has helped you become the person who has more influence in any given situation. And like anything, it's putting the work in before we get the opportunity. And that's where I think a lot of us aren't willing to sacrifice. Either we don't know, or we're not interested in putting the work in before we get the opportunity. And this takes time, right? This is a process. It is not an overnight, it's not an overnight thing. When it comes to influence and building trust in relationships, increasing your influence personally or professionally, it's not going to happen overnight. There's so much of the time that sometimes life events change our perspective rather quickly and force us to grow in some way. And that's not a bad thing. But a lot of times when we experience those life changing events that force a little bit of growth pretty quickly, we then turn around and suddenly expect to be getting the results today that we want based on who we are at the moment. And we realize that we are getting the results based on our track record, right? Influence is very cumulative. And so all of the interactions that we've had with someone in the past add up cumulatively. And so even if we've grown in the past several months, we look back and we think, well, gosh, why haven't I getting the benefits of more influence in this relationship? Because I've changed, I've grown, I've changed. But we also have to remember there's a track record there, and influence in that relationship is cumulative. And so a lot of times we have to be patient to stay the course. Excuse me. Being persistent, being consistent in increasing trust in that relationship. And so not just growing and developing ourselves, but staying the course with consistency over time. So I didn't really understand that. There again, it was many years into my career before I started understanding the principles of leadership and influence. And it's nothing that we're always it's nothing that we're ever going to completely master. I mean, building our influence personally or professionally is a journey, right? And it's incredibly dynamic because people are incredibly dynamic. And so it is a journey that we're going to be always traveling at some level, at some dimension. but it's easier to do the more we do it, like anything. And I've touched on that principle many times in the past because it is just such a principle because we get better at it, right? We're not great at anything the first time we do it. It takes some practice, it takes some effort and some repetition and consistency, right? Anything, pretty much anything you go do, you're not going to master it the first time you go out and do it. And influence is the same way. It takes some time to master the skills and development of increasing our influence. So, there again, these leadership principles are much like gravity, and learning how to work with gravity instead of against gravity makes your life easier. Influence principles are just like that. Learning how to work with the principles of influence so much easier than if we are working against the principles and influence. And once we understand them, it's easier to apply them. And boy, if I wish I had known that so much earlier in my career, life would have been different. But that's okay. Every step that's brought me to here is brought me to here, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's one reason I get excited about talking about the lessons of leadership and influence, because I want to help shorten somebody else's journey, right? There aren't any shortcuts, but maybe I can help accelerate the process for someone else. Influence is absolutely something that we can be building intentionally, one choice, one interaction at a time. Until next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks. Available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.